Well, it's that time again, that time when we step into the virtual bar looking for a conversation with some poor sap. We're joined today by Ken and Greg. I'm your host, Christopher Antone, and this is Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. And boy, do we have a poor sap with us today.
What?
How do you know she's poor? Because she's with us, that's why.
We're honored today to be joined by Heather Scott, and we're going to be doing our legislative session kind of review, kind of talk about what's going on over there in Boise. Mark 10:42 through 45 tells us Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave to all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And I think Heather Scott represents that. She is the servant of the people, and we appreciate her for that. And so, Heather, it's good to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, we really appreciate you being here. So, Heather represents Bonner, Benowa, Kootenai, Shoshone, and Clearwater. Is that all of them?
It was there 5.
Is that all? Are those on your? Are those the ones on your stationery?
They just keep at. Just say North Idaho.
North Idaho.
That's what I say.
She serves with Dale Hawkins, who's another really great guy in the House of Representatives, and then Phil Hart, who is in the Senate. Correct?
Yes, that is right. Who just got back from the border?
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, he went down to the border, huh?
Yeah. I think this is his second trip,
exciting.
So it might be a nice.
Yeah.
You might see him in the bar one of these days.
Yeah.
I think he'd answer our call.
Oh, I bet he would.
Probably. Did he find any of the missing children?
You'll have to ask him.
That'd be interesting to find out.
Here.
Yeah, tune in. Dun, 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 dun. So the last time we had Heather on our podcast was August of 2022, and you can find a link to that in the episode description. The first regular session of the 67th Idaho legislature began January 9th, ended April 6th. So 90 days of making laws and pushing legislation. You can find all of the bills and the laws that were put forward and passed on the website, right? The what's it called? The Idaho Legislature website. And every news outlet in the state has published their opinions, which that's a conversation in and of itself,
Yeah,
right?
There was very little variation. I
Yeah.
tried to scan through there and find any kind of dissenting opinion. It's not there.
It
Depressing.
almost seems like our media agencies are owned by liberal corporations.
What? You're being so judgmental.
Yeah, probably.
Come on.
I'm probably assuming a lot there. I don't mean to be a North Idaho idiot conspiracy theorist. Right?
Too late.
Uh-oh. Bum, bum, bum. Tune in next time. So we are honored today to have Heather, who has been working hard in this legislative session. Man, how many bills were put forward?
I lost count at like 500.
Oh.
There's a lot. I mean, I think they start with over 1,200, as many as people want to bring forward. But by the time we vote, probably around 550, 600.
Wow.
That's what we end up seriously looking at.
Now, is it on there? So approximately 2,353 pieces of draft legislation were written, 1,155 of those drafts became RSs, of which over 54% were introduced as bills, resolutions, memorials, or proclamations.
Let me tell you what a RS is.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so you may have a good idea for a bill, but you can't get a bill number till you bring that bill in front of the committee and they hear your idea and say, yeah, that's okay for a bill. That's called an RS, routing slip. It's just a weird name they give to it until you get the committee, the germane committee, to say, okay, yeah, we like it. Let's hear your bill. You have to present it before you present it.
And then the committee has to assign it a number.
Well, it gets assigned a number, yeah. If they say yes.
Oh, if it comes out of committee,
if they want to print the idea, it gets a bill number.
And who's bringing these forward?
Well, you'd like to think in an ideal world that your representatives and your senators would be bringing ideas forward, and we do, but the majority comes from lobbyists and the executive branch.
Wow.
And so I'd say probably 80% are coming from people other than your legislators. But I'll say over time, there's been pressure that they have to find a legislative sponsor for their bills. So I think when I first started, you'd see lobbyists up there presenting bill ideas.
Wow.
Do you have to have some sort of status in order to do that, or could I? As a regular citizen,
you have to have money, Greg. You got to have money.
Well, literally,
pay me more.
A lot of greasing of palms has to happen.
Any person can bring an idea to their legislator, and like you could bring an idea to me, and we can get it drafted up and start working at it. Okay. It's a lot more than just bringing an idea and getting it on paper. You know, you have to be able to sell that idea to 105 other different people that do not think like you think at all.
So when we say government by the people, for the people, we don't really mean that, do we?
Well,
it's the government for the government, by the government.
For corporations.
Yeah.
That's only because the people are not engaged. I mean, if the people were more engaged, you wouldn't see what you see. But people are busy with their lives, with all their kids in every single sport possible. And
we vote people like you in to do that for us.
Well, and I always say, when you vote someone into office, you don't give away your power as a citizen. You delegate your authority to vote on legislation and that, but you don't get rid of your power. But most people just stop exercising their power at that point. You know, they put someone in there and say, oh, they're a good one. I'm good with that. It's not enough.
I mean, do you think it's fair to say that that's probably pretty normal for people?
These days it is.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Was there a time when people were like every person was like engaged in the democracy?
I think early in our country's history, civics was taught. It was expected. It was part of daily culture. It's been forgotten. It's not been taught through the schools, through the families, and we've done everything to keep ourselves so busy in so many other sectors that government's not one of them.
Yeah. That was the whole reason behind term limits. You come into the government and you serve 2, 4, 6 years, pass all those laws, and then you leave and you go live under those laws.
Yeah.
And now it's not like that.
It's not, and I will just add something to term limits. What's really tough is your legislature is part-time. We're supposed to be there for 3 months and then go back to our regular lives. And many of us do. But the executive branch and the government structure itself and the people that are there full-time, they're there full-time. Mm-hmm. The establishment, the bureaucrats, they are what's running this state.
But that's starting to change, right? Didn't the legislature didn't they pass a bill that said that they can now assemble themselves? Like they don't have to depend on the governor to assemble them now, right? Is that a thing?
That's a long story.
Let's hear it.
Another podcast.
Well, the legislature has been stripped, has allowed themselves to be stripped of power. If you don't recognize your power, you're not going to exercise it.
Right.
the legislature is an equal branch of government. It's actually supposed to be more powerful. It's designed to be more powerful. It's closest to the people. Over time, because they have not exercised their power, they've taken their lead from the executive branch. A lot of people get elected thinking they believe in this top-down control instead of a bottom-up approach to government. So over time, the legislature has just let the executive branch or the judicial branch take over duties that is really the job of the legislature. So you kind of walk into what you walk into.
Is the answer to that full-time legislature?
You know, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I'll say that if you want less government, you maybe need to empower your legislators a little more. They've been they've been stripped of so much stuff. They've allowed it themselves. And so your representation, I just heard a fact the other night, we are outnumbered 600 to 1 by bureaucrats. Whoa. So for every one of us, there's 600 in the executive branch that are working against us.
We don't stand a chance.
So we don't stand a chance. And it's so lopsided.
Now, when you say bureaucrats, you're talking about not only the governor and his direct office, but all their agencies that they have created as
There's
well,
over
right?
200 agencies right now. I mean, commissions on, the Hispanic Commission, the Women's Commission,
and these are all appointed. These are not voted in.
They're
these are
all appointed
by the governor or the.
And now they're starting to appoint other agencies and divisions to police the agencies.
Wow.
You need a government for the government.
Yeah.
Literally, this has just brought to my attention recently, and it's kind of scary, and maybe your listeners should know. There's now a division that was put into place during COVID by the executive branch that is kind of overseeing and enforcement over all of our occupational licensing. So the cosmetologist and the nurses and the doctors and the dentist, they kind of have their own boards that kind of police them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now there's a police board over them, which is, in my opinion, it is a pathway for the CDC to come right into our state to enforce on these boards what they want in every bit of our health and welfare.
Because we've seen with the school system that the more government that you have, the better that the system gets, right?
Yeah, that's how it works.
You find
Yeah.
Wasn't it Ronald Reagan that said, hey, the scariest words ever were the government, and we're here to help? Yeah.
Well, and when you talk full-time legislature, remember, we're there 3 months. Yeah. So 3, 6, 9. So every 4 years, you get really 1 year. And it's broken. So it's not, you can't build on anything. Every year, you're starting from scratch.
And even if you're able to, because it didn't used to be that the legislature could call itself into session, and the governor had to do it, but now you can. But how does that even work? Like, how would you even start that process?
The legislature, in my opinion, has always been able to call itself in. What you see that happens is not always what is true. Okay. And so we are given the ability to act as an independent body. But when you have corruption, or you have AG's opinions that tell you otherwise, you have an executive branch telling an equal branch what they can and cannot do. And so if you get an attorney general, an executive branch decision that the legislature can or cannot do something, in my opinion, that's an overreach of the executive branch trying to control another branch. If you get leadership in your legislature that understands and recognizes the power of the legislature and doesn't bow down or kowtow to the executive, but what we've had the first 9 years I was in office, we had a good old boy establishment Speaker of the House. Same thing in the Senate. They're basically working hand in hand with the machine.
And you had an AG that would tell you that he is the lawyer for the government, not for the people.
Bingo.
Yeah. And so that, yeah.
So, yeah, you kind of get it. So, yeah, we could always pull ourselves. That bill we passed to get in the Constitution that made it seem like, oh, now we can call ourselves, really made it harder because now there's a constitutional definition of what that looks like. Before, there was no constitutional definition. If we as a body decided it was time to intervene from an overreaching executive branch or federal government, we could have called ourselves back in. Now, according to the Constitution, which we are bound by the Constitution, we have to jump through a bunch of hoops to be able to do what we had the authority to do otherwise.
When was the last time that happened?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
probably-
it wasn't something that
probably
was
never.
happening on a
I mean, that
regular
was
basis.
post-COVID, so it probably hasn't been used yet, right?
I don't know.
I doubt it.
Okay.
I doubt that they've ever called themselves into session, period.
It seemed like
I mean,
the requirements were so high that it really had to be a big deal to get
Yeah,
them
but
back.
even before the constitutional amendment, I mean, I doubt that the legislature ever actually called themselves into session. I mean,
I don't. I mean, I don't know.
It's tough.
That would,
But we could if we had a governor that all of a sudden decided, hey, everyone in the state's going to do this, that, or the
Right.
other, and we're not in session. I mean, who knows what
How
kind
far
of a
he could go.
tyrant, as we have seen, what could happen. So we've really made it harder for ourselves because it'll be harder to get. I think it's 60% or something like that.
Wow.
It's hard to get 50% on anything good.
yeah. All right,
so
so
many questions.
yeah,
know, sorry.
we got.
Oh.
We got. I mean, we could.
You
talk,
only have 1 hour.
Yeah, we could talk for
1 week.
hours on all this. The legislature passed an FY 2024 general fund budget of $5.18 billion, which is an increase of 12% over the current year's original appropriation. The budget included significant investments in transportation, water, deferred maintenance of state buildings, state parks, and education. The public school support program was appropriated nearly $2.7 billion, a 16.4% increase. This increase was boosted by the $330 million provided by H1 of the 2022 special session. The estimated general fund ending balance for fiscal year 2024 is $272.4 million. So it was a lot of people have complained that the Idaho state government is not trying to fund education. But obviously with a 16.4% increase, and some would say, well, a 16.4% increase from not enough is still not enough. Where do you think the legislature stands as far as like what's going on with education right now and how they're going to approach funding it over the next few years?
I would say our education is fully funded. You're never going to hear that from government. And the teachers union is too strong. It will never be enough. They will never give you a number.
That's all the levies every.
Well,
election.
the levies are a whole nother, that's
Yeah.
a whole nother issue. If the state's supposed to be funding education, why do we continue to push these levies
Right.
on these poor communities? And it just divides the communities and has them fighting. Our teachers, I think the minimum they start at is like $40,000 or something. They are well funded. Our schools, it's mismanagement of money, in my opinion, of our schools. It's top heavy, and there's a lot to unpack. I think you could probably do a whole show on your schools,
Yeah.
and you should.
Yeah,
And I am not the person to talk about schools because I do not believe in government education. I believe the parents should be raised. If you're a Christian, your parents should be raising their children and discipling their children, not the government.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And I am of the same opinion. I mean, I'm always telling people that you should pull your kids out of public school, but that's not the reality that we live in. And so are the public schools funded enough by the state that we do not need levies? Now, see, we have a in Lakeland School District, the joint school district, we have a lovely Christian lady who is working on some great conservative values, and she would tell you that the amount of money that they receive from the state is not enough to fund their budget, and that the levies are required. So that being said, where is the disconnect? Because it seems to me that if you have an honest woman running it, and this is not some liberal loon that just came out of nowhere. She's a Christian woman that I know. And if you have her and she's telling you that what we get from the state is not enough, then how do we begin to understand where all that money is coming from? How is that money funded, and why is it not enough from the state?
So your argument's not that great here.
Okay.
Sorry. One Christian woman at the school that's saying that there's not enough money for the school. What happens when I have one?
We're not talking about one Christian woman.
Okay,
we're talking about the superintendent. So
okay, a Christian nurse that says there's not enough money in the hospitals.
Big difference between a nurse and a superintendent.
Christian
It's apples and
pastor who
oranges.
says there's not enough. I'm just saying, there's a lot to unpack in
but
a budget.
she's not the only one.
Yeah, the media is really big
not
at
just the
pushing
media.
the agenda.
She's not the only superintendent that's saying that it's not enough. So, in the reality that we live in, if you have pretty much all the superintendents from every school district will tell you that what they receive from the state is not enough. That being said, where is the disconnect?
I don't know. I mean,
fair.
to honestly
That's fair.
answer,
That's fair.
I'll say this. There is one conservative superintendent that actually is almost put into office up in Bonner County. And I don't know what that one conservative, but I don't know very many conservative, I'm talking conservative superintendents across this state. And the fact that one conservative superintendent is almost elected and the school is going berserk, the teachers are going berserk, the establishment from Boise is going berserk, the lady, the superintendent, or the education department is going berserk.
You're talking about Brandon Durst.
I am.
Yeah.
So would one conservative person make a difference when they get in there and start really looking at the numbers? What they're calling for up in North Idaho, and why it's so controversial, is they're calling for a forensic audit. They found a lot of discrepancies in the money, a slush fund. And so
Well, for what?
it's not my I'm not gonna I don't want it slushies.
It's slush.
Slushies. So I'm not gonna go down the school road. I can't talk, and I don't know the topic as well enough as these superintendents, but I can tell you from what I vote on, when I'm asked to vote on to appropriate money, to do a study, to decide how to spend the money, to spend millions of dollars on a study to decide how, to me, there's a lot of waste in our education system. So it's bigger than a one question like, oh, is this lady right or not? I don't know.
Well, I remember when we were talking before about this, one of the things that kind of came to light for me was the fact that if we look at the dollar per child spent, and then realize that a lot of that goes for bus drivers, parking lots, bus garages. I mean, when we started hitting, where's that money going? It's spread across a broad spectrum of things, not just the education of the
it's
children.
just like any issue. It's like super complicated and complex, and there's a lot of nuance in it. And I think in an attempt to be a peacemaker, which I'm working on right now. This is something that I'm working on.
He's in therapy.
Yeah, and so in an attempt to be a peacemaker, it seems to me like it would be a good idea for our legislatures to sit down with our superintendents and say, well, tell me why you think you don't have enough money, and show me where the money is going. And I think that we could get a little bit of a better understanding, because up here there seems to be a knee-jerk reaction anytime that the word levy comes up, which I'm not a big fan of levies either, but this year in particular, especially when the assessment values came out and everybody's houses assessed higher, and that everybody was freaking out because like, oh man, my taxes are going to go through the roof. And then it turns out that, actually my taxes went down. So with the population increase, it didn't actually work out the way that people thought it was going to work out or were fearful of it. And so it seems that there is a disconnect between the people that are opposing the levies and funding education and people that are wanting to fund education. And there's no conversation in the middle on how we have to do something. I mean, the legislature is bound by the Constitution to fund education, right?
We have increased every year education. They are fully funded. What is a 12% increase? It will never be enough.
Right.
It will never be enough for these people.
Right.
And these are the people, and you look at what's coming out of our public schools, our government-run schools. I'm not going to go there, but they really need to be evaluated what's going on in our schools.
Yeah.
And
we should probably have Lisa back for another
Yeah, we need to have
episode.
Lisa back to have another episode about that and have a conversation. It might not, I mean, I would like to have Brandon back on and see if he can, at least give us some insight into what he thinks he's going to find over there, but
I'm the first to admit I am no expert on the schools. I believe parents should be educating their children.
Yeah.
And I
agree with you.
We increased, I think, 5 or 6%. All the bus drivers, all the staff working. I think all the teachers got a $5,000 bonus. Did you get a $5,000 bonus in your check this year? On a year where inflation is out, crazy. So they're being funded. I don't know who you're hearing from. I think you're going to be outnumbered if we continue down this road.
Don't look at me. No, I'm not making an argument for public education. I'm not a big fan of public education. I think it's a failure, and I think the numbers prove that out. We have better education statistics than Washington, and Washington spends 3 times more per child than we do. And so money is not the answer to education, obviously. I'm just trying to, throw out some language that at least may get people to start considering, instead of getting online and just flaming about your anger, perhaps a better method might be to sit down with someone and try and figure out, why do you think the way that you think? And is it a possibility that we can come to some type of an agreement? Or maybe look at the budgets
and look through the line item budgets.
Yeah, that's
if you think you're not getting enough money for something, show me where are you not getting enough money? And if you think it's too much, show me where.
And those, and we've seen those, right? And some, and the problem today is that people receive data and they look at it and they think to themselves, how can I get this data to fit into my bias? Instead of, what does this data say to me? And what I have found in speaking with people on both sides is that each group will take the same data and come up with their own talking points off of the same data that supports their conclusions. And this, I think, philosophically speaking, is the atmosphere that is tearing our country apart. The divisiveness of our politics in general in today's society is going to swing the pendulum hard in one way or another. And none of us are going to like that.
Yeah.
None of us are going to like that. And I just wish that there was a way to get the answers, and then just have them, maybe, what would be good?
What?
A news agency that
Fourth
what would you
state
call
kinda
that?
thing?
Like the press, maybe, that would actually
Report facts.
report facts without opinion. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
Hey, Greg, we'll see you later.
Instead of hiring and electing watchdogs, let's
Or
privatize it.
lobbyists.
Yeah.
Privatize it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just bring that up because it was the first thing on the list, and
Wow.
and it's
it sounds like it was the only thing on the list.
oh no, we got plenty to talk
So are there
about.
any bills in this list that you were particularly close to? You can kind of lead us through that you think average Idahoans, North Idahoans would be interested in understanding.
We're going to go through all 1,000.
I can hardly wait.
Yeah, 1,155 pieces. So
I actually had several bills passed this year that were my bills. I don't know that we'll get into them, but I think there's some we can touch on that were pretty important. We had to pass a lot of social bills this year. It's really sad when social issues are not common sense.
yeah, like diversity, equity, inclusion type stuff.
Yeah, well, like hauling children out of state that aren't your own to
Have
do
abortions.
and not letting girls use the boys' bathroom and boys use the girls' bathrooms. These may seem like wins, but overall it's just really a sad state when we have to actually bring legislation forth that doesn't allow.
That was the one that you talked about first was H242 AAS, right? Which was the bill which provided it to be a crime to traffic minors to other states for the purpose of criminal abortion.
Yes.
And when that bill passed, this is kind of what I'm talking about. This is much more on the other side. But when that bill passed and I watched some of the kind of rhetoric that was coming out of the left, it was basically there were accusations that our legislature are killing young girls because they can't go and get abortions. And I'm thinking to myself, has that been a thing? Like, if a girl can't get an abortion, does she just automatically kill herself?
That's the same thing they're saying with transgender. If
Yeah.
you don't call someone the pronoun they decide they are,
It's tantamount to murder.
that, you've just killed that person.
How do you, what do you even do, right?
You got to go to the Bible
Yeah. Like,
and realize it's all mixed up and we're in end times and what's right is wrong, what's wrong is right, and that's where we're at.
well, and just speaking about abortion, one of the claims is that the abortion bill that was passed was causing, what do they call the medical professionals that deal with emergent pregnancies, or MMSs, or
I'm not sure, but I know what you're saying. They say we have to shut down the birthing unit of the hospital
yeah.
now.
So like they use Sandpoint as an example of they shut down their pregnancy center, and it's because we have this abortion bill, and it's causing doctors to leave because they're scared that they're going to violate the bill. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
It's
I think there's absolutely truth to it. My wife just visited her OBGYN, and he's actually transitioning out, quote unquote, transitioning out of the industry. But he said there were, I believe the number was 13 OBGYNs in the Providence system that were quitting and leaving state because of that bill in Washington.
So that's one talking point where
That's
the
a
left
thing.
is correct.
I would disagree. It's
Okay.
scare tactics. It's scare tactics. So if you read the actual language of that bill, and some of it is how it was worded, but we've tried to fix that. It's intentional taking of a life.
Yeah, like you guys corrected it with H374, right, where it clarifies the term abortion, and it does not include the removal of a dead unborn child, the removal of an ectopic or molar pregnancy, the treatment of a woman who is no longer pregnant, and also clarifies that abortions necessary to prevent a pregnant woman's death or to treat a life-threatening condition of the pregnant woman are not criminal abortions. That's written into law.
It's written into law. It's clarified.
Yeah. So that is just they're leaving for no reason. Maybe, I mean, they're leaving, obviously. Is it because of the bill, or is it because they're afraid because of all the rhetoric?
People don't like controversy.
Right.
And the left is always going to, they want to kill babies. They want to kill babies.
Right.
Bottom line. And so if you put enough pressure on someone, they just don't want the pressure. And the left is really good at that.
Yeah.
They really are. So you can think it's true or not, but the law is clear. Nobody is trying to stop people from treating women for problems
Right.
or what have you. We're trying to stop the killing of babies.
For convenience
Yeah.
sake.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
It seems to me like this is an example of we've tried everything that we can to come up with a compromise, but it's just never going to be enough. Like what you were talking about with the school system.
Yeah.
You know,
There should never be a compromise when it comes to our babies,
Right.
killing babies. There should not be an exemption, in my opinion, for rape or incest babies. It's not. We are still taking a human life, and that is, we should not be doing that.
and I agree,
Mm-hmm.
but in an effort to save some lives, the compromise was made. Obviously, it was made. That being said, regardless of the fact that we don't believe in that, we tried, and it still wasn't enough. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like we're in a bad spot in America. We really are. When we can't make a compromise about a serious issue like abortion, and it's just never going to be enough unless it is just absolutely free, willy-nilly abortion whenever you want it, no big deal, on demand, without parent consent. You know, I mean, it's like, unless it's that, it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a scary world to live in, you know, and we've tried, you know, Heather, we tried to come up with a compromise.
I didn't try to come up with a compromise for murder.
Well, I get it, Heather. I truly get it. I'm not talking about
Right.
you morally. I'm talking about as a legislature in a state that is filled with people that have different ideals in a constitutional republic. Mm-hmm. We tried to create a legislative bill that encompasses all of their biggest fears, and it still wasn't enough.
It's never enough.
Yeah.
You could take and apply that to any context, right?
Mm-hmm.
And find that any compromise still isn't enough unless one side feels like they have won an unequivocal victory over the other side.
That's what it's boiled down to.
Yeah.
Well, and just think of Satan. Satan just wants you to compromise that one little bit, because as soon as you start going down that road of sin, that little compromise, you're off, and you start going down that road.
Right.
And that's why we have to stay strong on principles, especially when it comes to life. It's critical. We do not compromise on what God says. Do not murder.
Well, and we don't have to, right? We can uphold our moral values the same way we always uphold our moral values. The difficulty with abortion is that it is in direct conflict with other people's moral values. And when you run those things together in a constitutional republic, and there's no compromise on either side, then the inevitability is despotism. That's the inevitability. I mean, it's going to happen, because you can't live in a world where you have freedoms and are unwilling to come to the other side in some degree. I agree with you morally that rape and incest is not an excuse to kill a child. However, it's written into the bill. Whether we want it there or not, is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is it is in there,
It's already in the law.
and it is still not enough.
It's never enough.
And that, to me, is scary, because that says we are not going to compromise. This is not enough. It's never going to be enough. And then on the other side of that, you do have a group of people that are like, we're not going to have any abortions at all, regardless. We're not. It's like, I don't care if the mom's going to die. We're not going to have an abortion. And so if two extremes are dedicated to holding their positions without a middle ground, then our government can't succeed.
I don't see doctors ever going in there if a mother is her life at risk, they're going to try to save both lives. That they are. That's their oath.
Yeah.
So if we don't, we could go down this road forever too.
Yeah. Well, it's a massive issue, right?
It's huge.
And it's some of the things that were passed this year. The abortion bill was something that was passed this year. That was a massive undertaking. That part of it. It instituted when Roe v. Wade died.
Yes.
Right? So it automatically instituted. But that automatic institution, that was the thing that freaked people out, which prompted this H374, because the language was bad.
It freaked out the hospitals.
Yeah.
And the people that do want abortion, that want that wiggle room in there. But the nice thing is we are not doing abortions in Idaho right now. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, just like all the other states do allow marijuana, or we get our choice. We're not going to kill babies in our state. I think God will honor that. God will honor a state that honors His word.
Yeah.
So I think that's critical.
Well, and it's interesting, because when you start seeing these kind of things happening, and you get people who are hard on the left that are just like, this is not enough. They start using language like, well, I just have to get out of Idaho, right? And so then they start moving to blue states, which they're not moving to California, because California is not growing at all. In fact, California is in a big bind right now with their deficit. But then you have people from California and Oregon and Washington that are moving to Idaho to get away from that kind of hard leftist ideology. You're creating states that are aligned, diametrically opposed to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that sound like, right? The inevitability is that there will at some point be a secession of states. You can't prevent it. It's inevitable. And I don't see, this is kind of like what I'm getting at. I don't see any way to get to the table and to sit down and say, what can we do to live at peace with one another? Which is what Jesus would ask us to do. What can we do to live at peace with one another? And to not have all this conflict. Like, what could we sit down at a table with the transgenders of the world and say, what can we do to live at peace, right? And on both sides of that equation, if you were to sit down as a believer with the mind to create peace, you would be in the middle of such a stirred conflict that there would be no way to bring it together.
Well, I think you can do it as an individual. It's
Mm-hmm.
just you can't do it in politics. You're only going to get better politics when you change the hearts and minds of individuals, and that's through building relationships, as Jesus has told us to do.
Mm-hmm.
In the limelight, in the political world, in your voting, and it's this against this. It's not going to happen in the public sector. It's going to happen privately as we build relationships with our neighbors, our friends, with the people that look different than us or talk different than us. That's how we change hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, one-on-one, that would be the way to do it. It's just.
I mean, I've spent an hour speaking to a Satanist before. I've spent 45 minutes speaking to a drag queen person before. So that's how you understand the other side.
Yeah.
That's how you learn where people are coming from, and you share the truth of God's plan for their life.
Yeah. Do you know any that would like to come on the show? Because
I could get some on your show if you want that.
yeah,
Sure.
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
we would love to have some
you tell me.
conversations.
I meet a lot of people, so yeah, we can talk about that off show.
Yeah. So let's see. That's the abortion topic. There was quite a few things that came out of the abortion thing. There was the trafficking of minors came out of that.
Which we need the trafficking of minors for sex changes now too.
Yeah, there was. I was just fixing to say that there is a bill that was passed that prohibited a medical provider from engaging in a practice upon a child for the purpose of attempting to alter the appearance or affirm the child's perception of sex if that perception is inconsistent with the child's biological sex. And that's for children, like minors, right?
That's mostly when you have the schools that are saying, okay, Johnny, we'll call you Janie, but we won't tell your parents. You can't be doing that behind the parents.
Yeah, and I think that's the heart of it, right? You have to stop by law the groups of people that are going in with agendas to try to manipulate the children, because children are going to be impressed by your ideology if you give them that ideology enough, which is the danger of public school right now, which is why I tell people to pull your kids out of public school, because it's not critical race theory anymore. That's long gone. That train sailed, or that ship sailed a long time ago, right? It's diversity, equity, and inclusion now. That's what you have to watch out for. And it's not even social emotional learning. Like, there's a lot of things that came out of all of that are really confusing for people. People thought that social emotional learning was a new thing that was just all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Social emotional learning has been around for a long time, and it was not about diversity, equity, and inclusion at the very beginning either. But diversity, equity, and inclusion is now starting to seep in as a way of teaching kids to be inclusive. But it's not just really about that, is it? It's about changing their minds about their own person and justifying delusions about who they are. And
affirming a lie.
Yeah, which is why this bill was absolutely needed. And under this bill, like, if that were to happen, like a school counselor was to go in and affirm a child's gender identity, like they decided to identify as the opposite sex, could that apply to them, or is it only medical professionals?
I think it could apply to them. I think this was targeting the counselors, kind of pushing this agenda. I'm not sure what the penalty was. I don't recall if there's an actual penalty. We might have to come back in and put a penalty if they do it anyway, if they break the law.
Right.
But usually,
which they will, because they're ideologues. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We would hope they wouldn't, but.
Oh, they will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Their agenda has proven that they will.
I know.
Yeah, for sure. So.
I'll hit on this since it's in between sex education. We provided a definition of abstinence for sex education. So what the schools were doing is defining abstinence as any type of sex act that you can't get pregnant from. So you can imagine where that goes.
Interesting.
So it's okay to do this to this person or that to that person. As long as you can't get pregnant, that's abstinence. Right. And we had to actually define the word because the schools have twisted that in such a sexually pervert way.
That's kind of the purpose, right? That's the semantical war is the war.
It's the war of words.
Yeah. Like gender is a perfect example of that. They separate sex and gender, but gender wasn't necessarily intended to be used in conjunction with sex. Gender was created by the term gender was created and used by a psychopath who wanted to make people androgynous. And so the whole idea of controlling the dialogue is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really important. And maybe bills like this will go along with it, to help to define, this is legally what this means. Do you think there will be a bill that'll come out that'll be like legally defining sex and gender at this point?
So we do have a definition of sex, and the only reason I know that is I helped with a bill to make so there's actually in contracting law in our state, they were asking businesses for public works contracts to affirm that, or to agree to in writing that they would make sure all their bathrooms, not only on the site but back in their home offices, allowed for same-sex bathrooms. And so we actually had to reaffirm, and we had the wrong definition because we had a good definition of what sex is.
Right.
And so I don't remember, it may have been like the biological birth or something like that, but we got the actual language in there. So we do have a definition of sex in our law.
Yeah.
So
this
is scary when you have to make laws on what.
Right, and you have to spend your time doing that. And there was just an instance down in Coeur d'Alene where 2 girls were coming to the school board complaining about the fact that a boy was going to the bathroom and kind of harassing girls in the bathroom at their school. And I brought that up in a liberal Facebook group and dismissed it. Not a big deal. Overblown, just anything they could say to dismiss these young women's concerns. And it seems to me like there's going to end up having to be laws to protect women from the transgender movement.
It seems to me like a ton of these conversations and problems are all happening in our schools.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it?
We've spent a lot of time talking about all these issues, and they all come back to the one place where I think children are being indoctrinated, agendas are being pushed on children that are not the agendas parents might be wanting to push on their children.
Yeah.
So
there's a lesson to be learned in that. If you are a parent, you do whatever you can to try and get your kids out of public school. Public school is just, there's some people that just don't have a choice because education is expensive.
But at least know what's going on in your school.
And some people should not be homeschooling their kids. Let's just be honest. Yeah. I have seen the results of people who were not intended to homeschool their kids.
Let me push it one more step further. What about these churches that are open on Sunday and they close their doors Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and open back up on Sunday? Mm-hmm. Is there not a spot where we could have homeschool co-ops or opportunities for parents to network and come up with better solutions to what the government has provided?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what we do. We have a group called CC here, Classical Conversations, and they do an amazing job of networking with homeschool moms. Could actually help you to learn how to homeschool your kid because it's a skill. It's a full-time job. My wife homeschooled both of our kids, and that's her job. That's what she does.
That's what parents' jobs are, isn't it?
Yep. And we had to make a lot of sacrifices to make that happen. Like we have never had a new car. We have never had cable television. We've never had a lot of the kind of extras that people like to have. Mm-hmm. But our kids are conservative. Our kids know the difference between a man and a woman.
What?
It's worth the sacrifice.
Totally.
But it's a sacrifice nonetheless.
So now that you've brought that up, let's just go there. The difference between a man and a woman. And so now you have a student at a school that says men are men, or guys are guys, girls are girls, and there's no in between. Well, that's the truth.
And he doesn't get to walk.
So now not only do you have all this indoctrination in these schools and these things, now you cannot even speak the truth in a school without being punished. This is a big problem.
That's a major issue. There's a lawsuit in there somewhere.
I would
there
think
needs
so.
to be.
And of that same school, and this is sad, and I can say it because it's my district now, that same school, a sexual deviant mindset, I would say, a boy who had just graduated, with a recent tragedy with the shooting, that's a product of that public school, like government-run school. There's some trouble. So if we go full circle, not that I want to go there, but back to why can't we get the schools more money or levies or what? Should you?
Yeah.
Should we be pumping more money into a broken system? What's our solutions? And those are the conversations I think we should be having, rather than how much more money can we pump into this broken system that is producing sexual deviants, criminals, children that are so confused.
Yeah.
And we could go on, but we won't.
Yeah.
Because I'm tired of talking about schools.
Yeah, well, I mean, but like you said,
we keep going there.
like you said, though, everything goes back to that.
I know.
And
our children are.
It's the future. Our future generations are bound by what they're learning in this, and it's only going to get worse as time goes on. I mean, you think about like Bud Light, Bud Light, how it went through this whole ordeal, and you think to yourself, man, Bud Light has been this monolith of American pride for so long. How did this happen? What happened? And why are all these companies kind of all simultaneously doing the same thing? Well, if you think about it, all their advertising people probably graduated at the same time from the same schools and have the same mindset and philosophy of what to do with their promotional materials.
Middle managers was a generation overturned.
Yep. And so I think what you're seeing is the ramification of the education that they have received, which is terrifying.
Yeah. So here we are approaching an election year, and there were quite a few bills passed around elections and voting, right?
Yes, there were.
What were the important things that happened there, do you think?
I think there's a lot of issues on voter integrity. We want to make sure that people aren't cheating when they vote.
Right.
And so there was, I'm just trying to think of some of them. We did some auditing stuff. We did to stop the college IDs because they don't have an address and they're not really a good form of ID. Some of those kind of things. We did a bill to make it illegal to do the ranked choice voting in our state. You're going to hear a lot on this because there's a ballot initiative that they're trying to bring forward to push this into Idaho, ranked choice voting.
Explain to us what that is.
I wish it was that easy. It's a process to where when you vote, you're not just voting for who you think should be in that office. It's a way to dilute the amount of people running. So what it is, it's a way to flip your state blue really quick. And so all the states that have done ranked choice voting have flipped. They're going blue. And so what it does is they get this process in there, and it allows for, let's just say there's 5 people on the ballot. You don't just pick the one you think should win. You pick the one, you put them in a ranked order. Yeah. So if you think that Ken should be number 1 and Heather should be number 2 and Dale Hawkins should be number 3 and Phil Hart, you have a ranking.
Why does Dale get 3rd and you get 2nd? What's that all about?
We're even indifferent, So, but anyway.
Dale might disagree.
Okay, we'll put Dale's number 1 for sure.
Wait a minute. What about Ken?
Ken's dropped to 3. So what it does is the top 3 people in that race, everybody below that, they can take those votes for number 4 and 5,
right?
And they can shift those now to the other people. So let's just say 100 people voted for the first person, and 100 people were voted for the first person, and 50 voted for the second person, and the third person 25. but then all the people below that, they'd shift those votes up. It's a way to get whoever you want in there. It's very confusing, and the Democrats have pushed to get it. They kind of went crazy when we passed the law to stop it. The Republican Party, which, as you know, has kind of gone back to grassroots. In Idaho, the Republican Party, we have a great platform. We now have a conservative, liberty-minded leader at the front of that party, Dorothy Moon.
Yeah, Dorothy Moon.
And so there's been a movement of grassroots, bottom-up government. They passed a resolution saying we don't want this in our state. The legislature passed a bill that says, okay, we don't want it in our state, and the Dems are just doubling down. They're like, we have to get it on as a ballot initiative. So they wrote this ballot initiative up, and then they just had an AG opinion on it, which is the process. And the AG opinion said, too many topics. You have to just be more specific. And they said, we don't care. We're going to continue anyway. So they are reaching at straws to.
Unfortunately for them, we have an AG now that is an AG of the people and not an AG of the governor.
But the pressure that AG is getting from the governor's office and from the lefties and from all the other groups moving into our state, as I've talked about earlier, the Gem State heist. It's tough. You can barely keep your head above water, fighting off to even do the right thing.
Yeah.
So,
now, in this is a bit off topic, but
okay.
in
just don't go back to the schools.
No.
Okay.
In your mind, what is a kind of 10,000-foot view of the Gem State heist? What does that look like? What are we talking about?
What we're talking about is exactly what happened in Colorado several years ago. It is in a concerted effort to flip Idaho from a red state to purple at minimum, but preferably blue. And so it's a lot of money and groups being pumped into our state. You'll see all these new little groups popping up, like, hey, Moms for this, and all these groups to this appearance that there's all these people that just want to fix it. But they're really lefties in disguise groups. But what they're trying to do is shift our state into a different place. And that's the concerted effort. The effort in Colorado was a bunch of billionaires moved into that state with the push of the homosexual agenda and the marijuana stuff. And I haven't confirmed, but I have heard a couple. I have seen a couple things that one, if not two, of those same people have moved into Idaho. I haven't confirmed that, but it doesn't matter if they're actually here in presence or not. It is an agenda to basically flip our state. And you're going to see probably a really, really ugly primary election come May.
That's interesting. So do you think that the argument over the legalization of marijuana is not really about marijuana at all? It's about bringing people who are blue into the state?
I don't know. I will say this: Idaho's the only state that has not compromised on marijuana, and I tell people that want to legalize marijuana, there's a ton of other states you can go to. We need a state that will stand up, that will be different, that will be set apart, that will say no to killing babies and no to drugs. And we just need a safe space in this country, a real safe space, that we will not mutilate our children, we're not going to kill our babies, we're not going to legalize drugs. And there's enough other places you can go to do that.
Do you think that puts us in a weird, precarious position up here? I mean, we're surrounded by states who have legalized these things.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of people coming to our state. It's the number one state that people are moving to. They've seen the damages caused by some of these policies. And we're really slow to... Idaho never seems like a leader in much of anything. and we're very slow to follow. And I'm just hoping that with this legalization of marijuana and these policies, these other transgender policies, we do not follow. Now, that being said, there's a huge influence by Utah on our state, and they have gone woke, their agendas and their policies, and I see them infiltrating through the southern and the eastern part of our state.
Wow, the Mormons have finally lost power there, huh?
No, the Mormons are in power there. They're very woke. They push the vaccine. They are pushing the drag queen. They are not standing up to this. So they are part of the
Wait
problem.
a minute. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. You might want to do a whole
I
show.
need to
They're
look into
globalists.
that. Yeah, I need
Go
to
look
into
at
that.
the church. I've got someone that I could get you on the show that's here in town that can show you the documents on the vaccine, and they actually put out in their churches, be a good global citizen and get the vaccine. I can show you proof of that.
Okay, I get that.
And so
I mean, we were kind of like be a good global citizen and tell the government to stick the vaccine in their eye. That's kind of the way we were. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to people having an opinion about that.
yeah, well, it's the church, and they have quite an influence on their members.
That's interesting. I need to look into that to see
Yeah,
if that's true.
they are very global.
Well, they are very powerful. That's for sure. So, yeah. So, do you think some of these laws will? Let me backtrack, because I just had a thought. Like, if we're not going to, because I've always kind of been torn on this argument with the legalization of marijuana.
Okay.
Just gonna be honest with you. I'm more of a kind of classical liberal when it comes to the idea of marijuana. I don't know that I'm on board with the legalization of it completely, but I feel like the penalty for marijuana is just off the charts harsh. And if you are if you're taking the position that if you want to do marijuana, you're surrounded by states where you can go do that. Well, I mean, not really, because if you cross the state line with it, there's a possibility you could go to jail for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it seems to me like there is a little bit of a compromise to be made there with the people who do want to do that if they're willing to pay the penalty. And I'm just thinking pragmatically. I mean, that whole concept of turning the state blue through the legalization of marijuana, that's an interesting concept. I think that's something worth thinking about. Mm-hmm. Because then you do bring in a more liberal ideology when you do that, and that's probably not healthy.
Well, you talk to law enforcement officers and people that have worked in the prisons and prisoners, ex-prisoners, and ex-drug addicts, and you will hear over and over again, it is what got them started. It is the gateway drug to harder drugs. I mean, I would agree with you. I know a lot of law enforcement. I was a chaplain for law enforcement and rode in cars with a lot of law enforcement, and this conversation came up quite a bit. I would say it's pretty nearly 50-50 of officers who are in support of legalization of marijuana. But that 50 that's against it, they're really against it. Mm-hmm. And the people who are for it are just like, whatever. And if you use that kind of metric to gauge whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's probably not a good thing. And so, yeah. I mean, as a person who has a drug past, I can tell you from experience that I did not smoke marijuana and then think to myself, I should get some cocaine. It's not really about the drug itself. It's the people that you get involved with. Mm-hmm. I knew guys that smoked pot their whole life who are smoking pot to this day and never did any other type of drug. They don't even drink alcohol. Mm-hmm.
So it's oversimplification of the problem to just say that it's a gateway drug. But also, on the other hand, you look at states that have legalized it, nothing good comes from it.
Yeah.
Crime and homelessness, and that's we do have a pretty safe state when it comes to crime. I know we've had some tragedies up in North Idaho recently, but overall, some of these things happen every day in some of these other states.
Yeah.
A lot of these things you have to look at the second and third order effects.
Yeah.
To really see the cost to society and to morality.
Yeah.
As to what happens.
Yeah. It's a deeply nuanced issue. It's not.
And ultimately, we cannot legislate morality. We try to put boundaries on, but our pastors really need to be the first line of, sharing the truth and sharing what God's plan is for their lives. So, because there's a lot of questions. People have a lot of questions, and it's really hard to pass legislation that is morally right and biblically right, but you can't get the backing of the churches. That's the struggle I have in the legislature. They all want you to stop children from transitioning, but they won't be vocal and say, yeah, this is an abomination to God's design. This is not what God intended.
Yeah.
So
it's a weird spot to be in, honestly, Heather. I mean, if we're going to talk about this as a pastor, and just being completely honest, I have seen both sides of that. So we took a journey here the last couple of years, in being a little bit more politically active, being a little bit more vocal about political issues. And we're not going to stop that. I mean, we do voice those things. But what I found is that it's not the solution to the issue. If you become too overtly political, then what gets lost is the message of the gospel. And the message of the gospel, by my estimation, is what Christ commanded us to be doing. And if I honestly believe if we as believers were doing evangelism like we should, we would not be in the moral quandary that we are today.
I agree. And I'm not asking the church to get political at all. I'm just asking them the churches overall, to basically be in the Word and say what God says about these issues. God addresses every issue in science, every issue in politics. It's all right there in the book. He defines men and women. He talks about His design for their life and their roles, and so we wouldn't be having problems or questions about feminism if we would be preaching what God defines feminism as. What is a real woman? What does that look like?
Well, we can't even define what a woman is in today's society. So,
right.
And I'll take it a step farther. If we're just talking philosophically here for a moment, it's not just about preaching the truth, which we need to do. It's about preaching the truth in love.
In love.
And that's the one component that seems to fall apart when churches become overly political. They forget that they are supposed to love the world like God loved the world. He gave Himself for it.
Absolutely.
And so in the process of, let's just say, transgenderism, for instance, in the process of preaching against transgenderism, we forgot to preach that we should also love those people as well. And when I'm appalled a lot of times the way that I see Christians responding to transgender issues and people who are struggling with dysphoria, and everything. The name calling, the anger, the hatred, the bitterness. These are things that as Christians we're not permitted to do. If we're going to talk about sin, then yes, it is sinful to be a homosexual. This much is true. It is also an abomination before God to hate people
Mm-hmm.
and to be spiteful and to be all the sins that are on the other side of that. And I found myself getting into that position when we started becoming extremely political in some issues. I found myself getting to this point where, okay, I have to reevaluate what I'm doing here. What am I supposed to be saying as a believer? What am I supposed to be doing as a pastor? What are we supposed to be doing as a church? And what we're supposed to be doing is preaching the truth in love, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, and being a place where people can see Christ in us. And I think that's where it fell apart for the church. I think you either got to one side of that or the other. You either became too loving and accepting and inclusive,
Yeah.
or you became bitter and spiteful and polarizing. And that's why it's tough as a pastor to lead your church into the proper engagement of politics.
I think too is maybe it's not one side or the other. I think a lot of people just don't want to be forced into, it's not that they have a problem with somebody doing what they want, but they don't want to be forced to lie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to be forced to call someone a woman that's a man.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want, it's fine if you want to do that, but don't force me into lying by accepting the lie.
Yeah.
And that's where I think you see the people getting angry. Me personally, people do what they do. It's not me to judge, but don't push me into a point where you're forcing me to lie.
Yeah.
Or to,
that's well said. That's well said. And that's probably the way people need to respond. Unfortunately, that's not what you see. And I even encountered this just here recently at our church. People were having a conversation in our foyer, and they were just having a conversation about the things that are happening in the world. And a person made a offhanded smear, slander against a person who was a transgender person, which is funny. They set themselves up for it in a secular sense. But as believers, I think we just have to be very careful about how we approach that, because the love and tenderness of God is wrapped up in his justice and his holiness. And all of those are the same God. And we have to represent that in the person of Christ. And that's one thing. When I started going through the Beatitudes with our church, it was so convicting for me, because there were some areas that I knew that I needed to work on. Like, I was not being a peacemaker. I was not being meek when it came to certain things. I think this is probably a lesson that a lot of Christians need. And I think if people were to see that type of Christ-likeness, you would win the ideological war, because people would respect it.
I think you're right. I think the best prayer we could all have is that God help me to see people how you see them.
Yeah.
And I know I pray that a lot. Help me to see people how you see them. And he's saddened by what he sees, and we should be too. We should have compassion for these people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Even if they don't have compassion for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the hard part about the whole meekness issue, because I know that they're not going to display the same level of meekness towards me, and that I'm probably going to have to take one for the team at some point. And that thought is so offensive to my sensibilities, because I am not that type of person. If I can be very confrontational, and so learning to not be that way is going to be very hard. But I know it's a journey that I must undertake, because in order to be like Christ, I must demonstrate the things that he's told us that he wants from us.
Absolutely.
And I hope that people can see that. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I like what you're doing so much because I see that in you. I think that you have a level of meekness that, I mean, even when the abortion bill first came into play and people on the right were celebrating the fact that Roe v. Wade was dead and that now abortion is illegal, you were the first person that said, well, the language in the bill is terrible. And that was a great statement because it's like, okay, well, just because we win, quote unquote, doesn't mean that we won. We got to be very careful about the way that we approach these things. And so I've appreciated that about the way that you've approached things.
Well, and we only win when we change hearts and minds.
Yeah.
So these little battles don't mean anything to a victory until the minds and hearts are changed.
Yeah.
So
these bills are just kind of like
bills.
They are forced. They're legislated morality in
lot
a
of
larger
them are.
sense. I mean, I guess you could say that all law is a legislation of morality to a degree, but I mean, we're having to legislate what bathroom you can go to. I mean, it's
getting silly.
That's getting
Well,
kind of ridiculous.
at least your legislators can't play around on TikTok anymore because we stopped that.
Oh my goodness! Seriously?
Not on our legislative sites. Not on our work computers. There'll be
It's-
no TikTok.
Wow,
We're gonna stop the Chinese there.
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, they can't see what you're doing now.
Well, there's that and the land ownership
Yeah.
bill, right?
That was good.
That was wild to see.
Yeah, pushing back on foreign governments coming in and buying up our mining and water rights and mineral rights and
Does that
land.
mean that Australian company that's mining all of our what's the I always
trace minerals?
yeah
Cadmium.
yeah
It doesn't mean anything. It
That's
just
well that's still on
unfortunately
that's still on federal land,
it
right?
just depends on there's a lot of corruption in our state. So a lot of times these things look really good on the outside, but what I've learned is there's always little loopholes and ways around and
Yeah.
And so the best thing we have going is we have a good AG that hopefully will enforce laws as they should be and not allow the slip arounds. So,
Yeah.
So a certain amount of this is for show.
well, I
And
just
the enforcement
know.
part is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the hard work gets done.
The enforcement, if your government, if your local county commissioners are doing something super corrupt, ultimately your prosecutor has to pursue that or nothing's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? So it's not just you pass a bill and everything's better.
Right.
You need the people in place. You need the people in place that will work with you. And that's why I always encourage people, you need a constitutional sheriff. You need a prosecuting attorney that is not funded by George Soros, who has funded many prosecuting attorneys across the country. You need county commissioners that are making decisions for your county and not for something that the state wants out of their county. So there's lots to discuss in politics.
For sure. And it's going to require the people actually rising up and doing the job.
You get better
Taking the
government
responsibility.
by getting better people in government. You have to have good moral people with common sense willing to step up and put themselves out there into some of these positions, whether it's school board, whether it's library trustee, water district. You need good people to make good decisions.
Yeah. It's a massive undertaking.
But you just take it one piece at a time.
It's like, how do you eat the elephant?
One piece at a time.
One bite at a time. That's the only way you can do it. Well, do you have any last thoughts?
Man, as you look at all of the legislation that was passed in Boise this year, there were some advances, there were some compromises made, and I just hope that Idahoans won't expect too much change here to be visible right away. The hard work continues to go on. Pray for your legislators. Their work goes on. It's going to be a new session real soon.
Yeah.
And don't abdicate your responsibility to your legislators. You need to get out there, be present at the school board meetings, at the library board meetings, wherever you can, and assert your values and your opinion, because that's what they listen to.
Yeah.
You know, you look at these boycotts on Target and Budweiser and all of these. What was it? It was grassroots people just saying, no, thus far and no more. We're not going to stand for it. And the legislators are just your mechanism, your tool to help you make that get into law. But it starts with you right there in your home deciding thus far and no more.
It's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
to be involved in the process.
Don't be ignorant. Don't be lackadaisical. Get involved. It's important. Your children's future depends on it.
Yeah. And don't just believe everything you hear.
Yeah.
Either side.
Yeah.
Because media is terrible, and the internet is a dumpster fire for information.
It's malleable.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can add, don't be fearful to show up, to stand up, to speak up. Don't be fearful. You just have to speak the truth. You need to be salt and light, and you need to exercise your power in some way. I put out a pamphlet, 101 things you can do. Everybody can do something. It doesn't, and you can't expect other people to do what you think they should be doing.
Right.
Just find one thing you can do, and if we all do something, I think we can turn the ship around. It might take some time, but I think there's hope.
Yeah. The old adage that if it's everybody's job, then it's nobody's job. Yeah, we need to switch that around. It is everybody's job, and everybody's job is your job to do the work, to go and vote, to educate yourself. And, don't just show up to the polls and start scratching off, bubbles. Just, know what you're doing before you go in there, for sure. Well, Heather, do you have any last thoughts for us?
Just kind of what I said. Just try to get involved. Try to do something, and don't be fearful. Don't be fearful. We're coming on hard times, I believe. It just doesn't seem to be getting any better, but we have to still speak the truth and build relationships with one another. That is the most critical part.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that about does it for us today. I'd like to thank you for joining us. And if you have an idea for the show, you can always send it to us at 3p@athelbaptistchurch.org. We'd love to hear your ideas, your questions, your comments. I promise that Ken will answer that email.
Absolutely.
I will not, but
The
Ken
inbox
will.
is a little empty right now.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks to ABC and its members for their generous support of this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. Until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, and build disciples who can do the same. With that, we are out.